about the SLO assignment, and to do that, let's go ahead and move on to the assignments and quizzes section first, since it's the first assignment for the class, and also it makes perfect sense that it's the first one listed here. And just a reminder about the due date: it's going to be due about a month from now, so Friday, March 10th. At just before midnight. Please, no late submissions will be accepted, so everything must be submitted on time on March 10th, and this is going to be worth 5% of your total class grade. So let's go ahead and get into it, and let me open up the assignment worksheet. I've got a copy for you right here in this tab. Okay, first off, a little bit about what the SLOs are all about. So just a quick sketch in terms of what they mean. Basically, what you're going to be doing is engaging in critical thinking, in that I want you to interpret documents, papers, paintings, items that pertain to something that happened in a time period that we're studying in this class. And in this place, I want you to focus in on 4 items that pertain to the Gold Rush, 4 items that either came out of the Gold Rush directly or were indirectly related to the Gold Rush, but definitely have that context. I'm going to present to you 4 sources or 4 documents, and so the first thing you're going to do in this, I'll quickly go through these, and then I'll show you what the documents are. I want you to look at these 4 documents called primary sources, which are related to the Gold Rush period. So that's the first thing you need to do. The second thing is to analyze and synthesize these sources and respond to a historical thesis or a question. In other words, how do these sources prove or disprove a thesis statement or a thesis question? And I'll show what that question is in just a second. So in other words, part 2 is where you're going to first writing something, writing an answer. So in other words, number 1, what that basically means is that look at all 4 documents, and then 2, 3, and 4 is where you answer the questions. So I'll show you a little bit more about that in just a bit. Let me move on to part 3. Part 3, you're to give me a cause or an effect, a consequence of the Gold Rush, represented by the sources, or anything else you can bring to the table. So anything from the Rawls and Bean textbook that you want to incorporate in your discussion, you can do that too. And then the 4th thing you need to do, or actually the 3rd item you need to write, is describe 1 historical actor involved in the Gold Rush. There's a whole host of a rogues gallery, a wild cast of characters, so to speak, pertaining to the Gold Rush. We'll take a look at some of these characters in these primary sources. But of course, in the Rawls and Bean textbook, there's plenty more characters that you can choose from. You can definitely choose one of those characters too. Okay, so again, I'll come back to writing your answers, composing your answers in just a bit. Let me go and scroll down, and we'll start taking a look at the 4 sources, the 4 documents, one by one. Okay, so we'll come back to this in just a bit here. All right, and we'll just scroll down to it's about page 4 or page 5. So here are the 4 primary source documents. So again, these are documents or sources that came out of the Gold Rush, or maybe came within a few years after the Gold Rush. So even if they're not quite part of the Gold Rush context in terms of the 1850s, maybe they were reproduced or painted or written within a few years after that. So pretty close to the Gold Rush time frame. That's what I mean by indirectly related. Okay, the first source right here is we have a painting, and what this painting or this diagram or picture seems to represent is a steamer ship of gold miners. Looks like they boarded a ship somewhere. We don't know if they're coming from New York. Maybe they're coming from Europe. Maybe they're coming from the Atlantic coast of Mexico. We don't really know for sure. But what we can deduce from this is that this is a group of men who are on a steamer ship. They're sailing around the Cape Horn, which of course is a tip of South America. They're rounding the Cape, and they're going to go up the Pacific coast, up the coast of Chile, Peru, Western Mexico, and then eventually make their way into California. So in other words, this is a scene which most likely depicts men sailing to California in 1849, 1850. And what I want you to do is look at that and tell me what are these men going to do? What's going to happen when they come to California? Uh, uh, um, what impact are they going to have in terms of the environment of California, in terms of the streams, the rivers? What's going to happen when they come across the native Indian population? And what's going to happen when they come to the across the Mexican population? So the Mexican population, that's the focus that I have for the thesis statement. I'll explain more about that in just a bit. But just try to put yourself into the place of these men and try to analyze or think what effect these men are going to have when they come into California on an ecological basis, a psychological basis, a political, economic, social, and so forth. Because these men have to go somewhere, and when they go somewhere, they're going to cause some problem, for lack of a better term. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this painting. So that's the first source: the scene of a steamer ship sailing around the Cape Horn on their way to California. The second source is a little newspaper blurb which came out in the Daily Alta California, which was one of the newspapers that popped up in the early days of the gold rush. Newspapers popped up like weeds in the gold country back in those days, and a lot of the newspapers had stories of violence, of hangings, of people getting a shot in saloons, just wild and wacky stuff. Maybe stuff you associate with some of the National Enquirer and some of the tabloids today. A lot of newspapers back in those days definitely had that type of a wacky and wild stuff. And in this case, this newspaper column from the Daily Alta California talks about the execution of a Mexican lady named Juanita of Downeyville. This is a very classic case in the annals of Mexican American and Chicano history. And this is stuff that I actually get into more detail in a lot of my classes for Southwestern and Mesa College. But in this source, a newspaper account which came out back in those days, it talks about the execution of a Mexican woman by the name of Juanita. And when you look at this short column, you notice the tone of the writer, the journalist. It's definitely an interesting tone on the part of the journalist. And you have to consider the audience that is the people who are reading this, that is the men who are there, and what background these men are from. And for instance, let me just quickly read a little bit of the second paragraph. It reads, "In the Herald we find an account of a murder and the hanging of the perpetrator, who was a woman." Look at that, the exclamation point. So obviously there is a sense of excitement, of yellow journalism, hysteria. So definitely the punctuation and the language used by this is something to look at when you're looking at this little write. So again, it's not very long, but I think it definitely gives you an indication about the mentality and the mentality and the mindset of a lot of the miners in this part of California in 1851. So keep that in mind. Keep not just the actual words itself, but the tone of this little article. Keep that in mind too. All right. The third source is an interview that actually took place in 1875. It's an interview with the legendary Mexican by the name of Tiburcio Vasquez. And Tiburcio Vasquez was of the upper class Californios. These were the upper class Mexicans who, you might say, dominated California politics and society up until the Gold Rush era. And Vasquez talks about how that began to change in the early 1850s in 1852. He talks about a spirit of revenge and hatred, and which took possession of me. He talks about his clashes with Anglo-American authorities. So pay close attention to Tiburcio's tone that he tells to the Los Angeles Star newspaper in 1875. You might say that Vasquez has a bit of a maybe type of a Robin Hood tone. So depending on your perspective, that is, if you were Mexican in late 19th century California, maybe you were sympathetic to Tiburcio, or if you were Anglo-American and you read this, maybe you had a bit of a different perspective. But definitely take note of Tiburcio's tone and his attitude as he reads, as he gives this interview, and think about what it was which caused Tiburcio to do the things he did in the 1850s. So that's the third source. An interview with the legendary Mexican bandido. And speaking of Mexican bandidos, let's go to our fourth and final source. This is a classic painting by the painter Charles Christian Knoll. Knoll depicted many scenes of the West. In the post-Civil War period, there was a fascination with the West, themes of heroism, vivid color, action, these types of themes, and obviously we see that in the depiction of Joaquin Murrieta. He was another legendary Mexican bandido, but unlike Tiburcio Vasquez, we don't know if Joaquin Murrieta was actually real or not. And in fact, the Murrieta myth, that's going to be mentioned in Daughter of Fortune, as you'll be seeing within the next couple of weeks. But I want you to focus in on the color, on the setting, on the action, and also on the facial expression. Not only of Joaquin himself, but of the horse here. Joaquin, you might say, represents the Mexicans fighting back against the intrusion of Anglo-Americans, of people coming into their lands, their gold rush mines, their possessions, and essentially overturning the social order that Mexicans enjoyed up until the gold rush period. So in other words, as you're looking at this, what is this painting telling you? What is this painting telling you about how Mexicans perceived Joaquin, and what does it say about Mexicans pushing back against the new social order being imposed by Anglo-Americans in the years after the Gold Rush? So definitely a lot of themes of heroism. So definitely, if you're of Mexican background back in those days, you see him as a hero. But if you're Anglo-American, you see him as a bandit, a goon, a thug, a villain, whatever you want to call it. Of course, in the Rawls and Bean text, there's a lot more description about both Joaquin Murrieta and Tiburcio Vasquez to give you some more background information. But in any case, that's a source 4. So after you look at these 4 sources, let's go back to the beginning of the worksheet here, and here's what it is that you really have to do. Okay, so as we saw in step 1, I want you to look at all 4 of those documents, which we just did right now. And then the second thing you need to do, and here's the first thing you have to write, is explain in 3 to 4 sentences, or you can go 5 to 6 if you need more. Try to tell me how the 4 sources prove this following thesis statement. The thesis statement is this: I'm making a statement, a hypothesis, and I want you to try to use the 4 sources to either prove or disprove the statement. The statement is this: the onset of the gold rush in California directly contributed to the decline of the social political standing of the Mexican populations in California. So that's my statement. How do the 4 sources prove or disprove that statement? So I gave you a lot of good background information in my description of the sources, so you can definitely take what I said to help you out, or whatever other ideas you might have either in addition to mine or maybe in opposition to mine. It's your call. In other words, what I want you to do is analyze the 4 sources according to your perspectives, your ideas, your own thoughts, and using your own thoughts and looking at the 4 sources. Then tell me how the sources prove or disprove the following thesis statement, the one that I have listed here. So it's a bit of a tricky exercise, but it's part of the critical thinking agenda with these SLO assignments. So definitely take your time in formulating an answer. But if you need more than 3 to 4 sentences, 5 or 6 sentences, by all means, take as much time as you need in order to develop essentially a paragraph to analyze this thesis statement. Okay, parts 3 and 4 are a little bit more straightforward, so you don't really need to get into more, shall we say, critical thinking. But definitely, if you want to get into 3, 4, or even upwards of 5 or 6 sentences, please be my guest. Part 3 is tell me a cause or consequence that led to the gold rush. What did the gold rush do? What was one major effect of it, politically, socially, economically, or what was a cause of the gold rush? What caused Americans to what caused the gold rush to be such a wild, a crazy, monumental event in not just U.S. history, but in world history too. So cause or consequence, cause or effect, that's what I want you to talk about in part 3. That is, what is a cause or consequence of the California Gold Rush? And lastly, describe one historical actor in the gold rush. That is, one person who was active back then. What was his or her influence, standing, situation, station in life, so to speak, in the Gold Rush period? So, any person, maybe someone that was described in the 4 sources, or someone described in the Rawls and Bean textbook. By all means, anybody at all, just as long as that person is involved in the California Gold Rush. What was his or her involvement, and why is he or she significant in Gold Rush history? Okay, so that's what you have to do. Again, look at all 4 documents and then answer parts 2, 3, and 4. And to put your answer in, all you need to do is, everybody, is go back to assignments, click the Gold Rush SLO black link right here, and then go ahead and click the Write Submission box. So I don't want any files attached to this. We'll do that for the other assignments, but for here, just click Write Submission. Excuse me, everybody, and then just simply write your answers here. So you can number your answers 1, 2, and 3. In fact, we'll click the number here. So write your answer to the thesis statement question right here. Once you're done with that, click Return. Oh, I'm sorry, that. Okay. Well, okay. Let me just go ahead and demonstrate here. Okay. I think that blah blah. Okay. I don't want you to write. I think that blah blah blah. You get the idea, and then after that, then in your second one, talk about a cause or consequence, and then in the third one. So let me just do this. I'll just put a ipso facto Lauren. Those of you that are Mac users, you know what I'm writing here. Just that mumbo jumbo. I think the placeholders for when you're writing Word files. Okay, so then once you do that, and then go ahead and click Return, and on the third one, then talk about the historical person, the person involved of historical significance in the Gold Rush. So I'll just go ahead and put now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of his country. Okay, and so of course, I don't want you to write any of these, but you get the idea. So you can number these 1, 2, 3. Use the numberless setting here, or 2, 3, 4. Either way, just write your answers directly here in the assignment submission area. No need to send me a file. In fact, please don't send me a file. Just write your answers directly into here, and once you're done, click Submit, and that takes care of that. So let me go ahead and get out of here. I'll get back to the assignments section. Okay, so there, everybody. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope at least gave you more of a sense in terms of what this whole SLO exercise is all about. And I think especially for those of you, the international students who maybe are just are just learning about what SLOs really mean. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm making you people, making you guys the historians. I'm giving you just some basic data, some documents, and then you interpret those documents as best as you can. Again, the objective here is to engage in critical thinking. Of course, a lot of my colleagues have different versions of it, and of course in the other schools too. But this is something that's been going on for the better part about the past decade with the community colleges, and this is essentially my version, my view of what the SLO is all about. And in this case, we're focusing it on the California Gold Rush and how it impacts California's Mexican populations. Okay, everyone, so that's it. That takes care of that, and I'll definitely be back with you soon with plenty more nuts and bolts videos.